All right. Testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3. You go.
Testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Yeah, it sounded fine on Twitch. Now, YouTube 1 2 3 1 2 3.
YouTube 1 2 3 1 2 3.
It sounds fine to me. I don't hear anything in the background either.
I think it's just the computer noise then, like, because I can just hear it when I like kind of crank my earbuds and stuff. But I'm sure, I don't know if like people just like listening in their car or whatever. I don't know if they can actually hear that if they don't play it real loud or whatever. I think I'm just being fucking anal about it. All right.
Now we're finally. Yes, sir.
Hello and welcome to episode 171 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking a lot about CDL Major 3, the third major of the 2025 Call of Duty League season is in the books. And the Los Angeles Thieves, the roster that I don't know if we both did or if I just said it, but certainly we both think is one of the most talented rosters in Call of Duty history. They have claimed their first championship. They have won their first tournament, LAN tournament as a team. And we have a lot to talk about within that, including a rather disappointing performance from Atlanta FaZe, who were attempting to three-peat the majors, four-peat overall. OpTic Texas obviously not having a great weekend, and a star-making debut by a player I did not really know much about before this weekend. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bank?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, it was a action-packed weekend of Call of Duty action. I'm really excited to dive right into this because there's a ton of stuff that happened this weekend, but I do think the two biggest storylines from the weekend, really, I mean, obviously there's multiple you could choose from, but I do think LA Thieves hoisting their first trophy, especially we were talking about earlier, the off season they were dubbed a super team, and I know I said it multiple times, and even as early as last episode, that the bar was set at the expectations being multiple titles for them, or titles with an S, titles plural, however you want to phrase it. And they hadn't had one up to this point, so now that first step is done. They got that first one. I think that's like the bare minimum that this team was expected. Now they look to build on that, and the other, just the incredible situation of Beans facing visa issues. We ironically tried to get the preview show up a day early for you guys, so it wasn't, gave you time to hear us break down the first round of winners bracket matchups. And naturally the Ego Chall curse struck again, and Beans dealt with visa issues on the Wednesday when we would have usually recorded the show before instead of the Tuesday. But nonetheless, that led to this incredible story of Mercules finding out in like less than a 48-hour window of him going from competing in challengers to filling in for the Toronto Ultra, and not only filling in, but making it to Championship Sunday and having an incredible debut event that, in my eyes, should lead to him unquestionably being on a CDL roster this week when Major 4 qualifiers start in less than 5 days. So, I talked a little bit more than I usually do at the beginning here, but if you can't tell, I'm pretty amped up and ready to go.
Yeah, Mercules' story is kind of like a Disney movie in essence. Like, he just kind of comes off the sidelines and he has this incredible run that nobody's expecting. Like, Toronto goes farther than I think anyone would have reasonably expected of a team playing with an emergency substitute. But we will get there. We will talk about the Toronto Ultra and we will talk about Mercules a little bit later in the show. But first and foremost, we have to talk about LA Thieves. The Thieves, like I said at the very top of the show, they're a super team. That is undeniable. Coming into this season, everybody expected them to be one of, if not the best team in the CDL. And through the first two majors, I think it wasn't that they weren't one of the best teams. They certainly were. I think we both slotted them at number 2 at worst, but they had not claimed that championship that you were talking about. The expectation for a lot of these teams in a CDL season is that you win at least one major and potentially more in hopes of obviously winning the CDL championship at the end of the season. And of course, we will get there. We will eventually get to that point and see if the Thieves or one of these other quote unquote super teams can do that. But they this weekend claimed their first title and did it in pretty dominant fashion. Of the 4 series that they played, including the grand finals, which was a best of 7, they swept 3 of them. Unsurprisingly, they swept the Carolina Royal Ravens. So that one was something that we've been talking about on the preview show about how Carolina, with their new look roster, how they would come out and play against LAT. Turns out it was pretty much the exact same that we had saw from them previously. A little bit better, but certainly no map wins, which I think they're now 1-18, if I'm not mistaken, against LAT this season. And then they beat the Miami Heretics as we expected them to do. Of course, I don't know if we really expected Miami to be in that position, but that turned out to be a very impressive win considering how well the Heretics did this weekend as well. And then they beat the Vancouver Surge in the winners finals in a Game 5. I think you said that you might pick against Vancouver in the losers finals because of how tilted they would be from that result. Either way, the Vancouver gets back to the grand finals. And unfortunately for Vancouver, they get swept for the second major in a row. So they are now 0-8 in the major grand finals this season, which, I mean, it's great for them that they're getting these CDL points. They're getting the experience of playing in these big matches. Unfortunately, they've run into arguably the 2 best teams in the league in Atlanta FaZe and LAT in these grand finals. In LAT, I think I should pose this question to you so we can have a conversation about it. Is LAT now definitively the best team in the league with this win?
I mean, at this point right now, yes, they passed FaZe in the CDL point standings to officially they're in first with 410 CDL points, and FaZe are in second at 390. Toronto's in third at 310. Vancouver's in fourth at 300. So the gap there between first and second and third and fourth is, 80 to 100-ish points. So I think the conversation for best team has to revolve around LA Thieves and FaZe, and you have to give credit to FaZe for winning the first 2 major championships of this year. But the way that Thieves are playing at this point right now, they are the best team right now, and that's kind of what I was saying going into this event. I felt like, gun to my head, I had to pick one team to win this event. It was going to be LA Thieves. So I think when it's all said and done, for maximum storylines, if Thieves win Major 4, we look at Thieves winning 2 majors, FaZe winning 2 majors, and then Champs becomes a battle for who is definitively the best team in Black Ops 6. If Thieves don't win Major 4, and if anybody else does, that adds another layer to the whole narrative there. If FaZe rebound and win Major 4, then I think that greatly shifts the conversation in their favor. But yeah, at this point right now, LA Thieves are playing like the best team in the game. And I again don't want to discredit FaZe's 2 championships. They, again, the CDL points standings kind of breaks it down in terms of um the story of the season so far to this point. But yeah, right now, I keep on wanting to say FaZe. LA Thieves played pretty well. They literally lost 2 maps this entire weekend, and it was the first 2 maps of the winners finals. So they won 6 straight maps to start the tournament, lost 2 maps to Vancouver, and then won 7 straight maps after that point. So um they even on the Scump watch party when we were going into the grand finals, like before, I think it was pretty clear in their minds they were going with LA Thieves. But one thing we've talked about even before this tournament is how dominant LA Thieves have been in control. And in the best of 7 format, there are 2 controls in the series, and it didn't even get to that point with this finals. But that's obviously something that plays greatly in their favor in any of the other tournaments coming up this year, and almost every series, because we talk about hardpoint being played twice in a series, search being played twice in a series, but those the second hardpoint and the second search aren't guaranteed if you get 3-0'd. And as a team like Thieves, like you can't get 3-0'd if you're as good at control as they are. And I think that's kind of, I don't want to say that's the reason why FaZe were able to reverse sweep Vancouver, because I think that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. But you look at that just in the most basic way possible. They lose the first 2 maps, they being LA Thieves, to Vancouver in the winners finals, and you gotta imagine Thieves are just in the back of their head and they're like, yeah, we're not getting swept here. We know how good we are at control. So we just, it starts with 1 map. We gain momentum from winning this, and it completely shifts the series on its head. So I think obviously we've talked about the importance of search and the importance of hardpoint at different times for different teams over the years. But this really feels like the first time. And I feel like there have been other times where teams have been good at that third game mode, whatever it is, and it hasn't been really a major talking point because it is only played once in a best of 5. But right now, just the way I'm pretty sure since the only maps they lost would have been the first 2 maps to Vancouver. They didn't lose a control all weekend, so it builds on to how strong they are in that mode, and that's something we're gonna have to, continue to see. I mean, if you're any other team in the league, you got to be watching Thieves play control and see what you can pick up there, because obviously they know what they're doing in that mode. And you look at a team like FaZe, you expect them to be good in search. You look at a team like Vancouver, you expect them to be good in hardpoint. If any of them can, figure something out and control to the similar tune of the success Thieves have posted, then they get more dangerous, and that can make the race towards the end of the season that much more exciting. So, and again, I don't want to say like, oh, Thieves won this event because of control, because that's definitely not the case. But end of the day, I think back to the original question, Thieves have just looked really, really strong lately. And even Hydra in the post-event interview was like, I feel like I've been an onliner for 6 months now, and it feels good to finally do it on LAN. I think that's a pretty good way of summing it up. They've been a good team all year. They just hadn't seen the actual trophy lifting success on LAN this year, because they had the finals lost to FaZe Major 1 and then the 4th place finish at Major 2. But here, Major 3, they get the job done. And as we always say, you want to be playing your best COD towards the end of the season. We're not at the end of the season point yet, but we're getting there, and Thieves are looking pretty strong. So we'll have to see if anybody else can pick up the pace and hang with them for the rest of the season.
I really think that this LAT team this year, the way that this season has went for them, it's very FaZe-like. What we've seen of FaZe of the last 2-3 years, Cold War kind of being the notable exception because they were so dominant in that year. Otherwise, FaZe has been this incredible online team. They've been incredibly consistent in their online qualifying matches, and they have, as a result, they have finished first as the first seed at the end of each CDL season. So this would be the 5th consecutive season that they're able to do it. LAT feels like that kind of team where they've had such consistency. We've talked about it, like just the map counts, like they're going like, 15-3 in map count, or 18-4 in map count in an entire qualifying set, where that is something that FaZe would have done. And then they went to LAN, and then I think people would give FaZe a lot of crap for being Silver Surfers or not being ready to win those championships on Championship Sunday and all that. And FaZe and LAT could be kind of criticized for the same thing, I guess, this season with the Game 7 loss in Major 1, not even getting to the Grand Finals in Major 2. And then they get this win. I think it's kind of a weight lifted off of their shoulders, so to speak, because it's not when will they win one, it's will they win another one. That is a much better question to be asked of them than previously. And, I just think this team, I'm happy for them, because I think any championship team or any super team that gets put together and they don't have that kind of immediate gratification, then there will be those questions that remain, and those guys can be criticized even more harshly, like even by their own team owner, because Nate Shot, obviously earlier in the season when they I believe it was Minor 1 that they didn't win, and he kind of like went at them, and I thought that was pretty stupid at the time, and I still do think it's pretty stupid. But that kind of stuff, even if it is tongue-in-cheek, there is that kind of reaction in the community a lot of times of like, oh, LAT got 4th at the major, they're bums, drop Envoy, pick up whoever. That's kind of the reaction, almost like a Ricky Bobby, or if you're not first, you're last mentality. And it's the same thing for FaZe, and obviously OpTic is going through that at a much more extreme level this season. But I was looking up the control stats while you were talking, and I was just looking kind of more broadly. They're by far the best control team in the league, which is unsurprising, but it's surprising by how much, because FaZe is by far the second best team. Like, if you look, I don't even know how this is true, to be honest, but all but 3 teams in the CDL this season have a losing record in control overall. So I guess it's just, LAT and FaZe to a certain extent are kind of farming control wins from these teams consistently. The only 3 teams with a winning percentage in control this season are LAT, Atlanta, and Toronto. Those are the only 3 teams so far.
Wow.
Toronto's in 3rd. They have a 57% win percentage, pretty good. That's nearly you're getting more than half of the wins, I think is a pretty good way of just looking at it. FaZe has a 68% win percentage, so 2 out of 3 maps in control, they're winning. Then there's LAT, they're at 85% in control this year, which is by far the highest win percentage in any game mode of any team in any game mode. So I think that really shows the level of dominance that they have. And when you're winning 85% of controls, and this is across online and LAN, I think what people kind of take for granted is, of course, control is, by just the nature of the series, the least important game mode in Call of Duty, because you play it the fewest amount of times. But if you're able to win 85% of those, that's almost not, it's not entirely, but it's almost a guaranteed win, like where you can almost say, okay, we know we at least are going to have 1 map win here in this series. We just have to win 2 of the other 4. Like, we just have to go 500 in the rest and we'll win this series. I think that's a great confidence boost for LAT. And then you add in that they are one of the best hardpoint teams. I believe they are the best hardpoint team now, and they're the second best S&D team. So, they have a 68% hardpoint win percentage, which is the best in the league. And then they're second, like I just said, in S&D at 63%, only a percentage behind Atlanta FaZe. So, like, when you couple all that together, it kind of makes sense why they're able to do what they're already doing, right? That they're able to win 90% of their qualifying matches or qualifying maps, and then go to LAN and have these big runs. Like, this is the second grand finals appearance that they've had. Of course, Major 2 was a disappointment, but they've still been able to really do some great things this season. And I just think, to answer my own question that I posed at the beginning of this segment, talking about LAT, if they're the best team, I think we'll do the power rankings, and I know we haven't done them in a little bit, or the tier lists in a little bit, because we forgot to do it before Major 3 started with everything. But I think they have to be, like, if I'm going to pick, like, who's going to win champs, if champs starts tomorrow, I'm obviously going to pick LAT. And that's not just a momentum thing. This is just, they have been at the very top or near the very top this entire season. And of course, Atlanta has gotten the better of them in the majority of their matchups this season. But those teams haven't played, and I looked it up. The next time that they play next week, I believe. It will be more than 3 months separating their last matchup and this next matchup. So who knows how much has changed with the dynamic of these teams. And it was a very close dynamic when it happened back in February too. So that was February 2nd, the last time they played. They'll play in early May. LAT, it feels like, has just gotten better. Atlanta, we talked about it on the last pod and probably a few pods before that as well. But they've looked really vulnerable in a lot of these series, and this performance at Major 3 did not help that. This was, of course, their worst performance on LAN all season, which doesn't mean anything because they won the first two. But this was really disappointing in just the way that it happened, like losing in winners round 1, getting eliminated by Miami. That kind of stuff is just unexpected, I would say, from Atlanta FaZe. So, all things considered, I think this is an incredible win for LAT. They have a very, very bright future, and I'm just more interested to see if they can roll this into Major 4, because we have kind of seen at times when a team wins a major, the next qualifiers can be kind of like almost a hangover of sorts. And this is a little bit different than even some of the other majors, because there is no break. It's not like you come home, you spend a week practicing, getting ready for these online matches. They're flying, from Miami to Dallas, I'm sure, tomorrow morning or maybe even tonight, and they get in and the matches start like in 4 days, and they have to be ready for that. So I'm not sure what how that'll work out, but I'm very interested to see if LAT can keep the ball rolling and potentially repeat at Major 4.
One other, it's not really one thing, but another element to this LA Thieves topic that I wanted to touch on is Ghosty. We talked about him last episode, and this is officially his first championship. Yeah. So congratulations to Ghosty.
There's a well-timed video that we did.
He in post-match interview, he's like, "Thank God I didn't get another second, or I would have killed myself," is what he said. Joking, of course, but hopefully. But he doesn't have to worry about that, because he's finally, I say finally there. He's gotten the monkey off his back, and I shouldn't say finally just because
it hasn't been that
it's
long.
Not like this. Yeah, it's been 2 years and not even 2 full years, because it was he made his debut halfway through the season 2 years ago, so maybe it's like technically 2 full calendar years, but whatever. Congrats to Ghosty on getting that championship. Heading into today's action, Championship Sunday, I saw was it Breaking Point that tweeted? It was Breaking Point tweeted last night that this Sunday, today, was the first time in CDL history that neither OpTic Texas nor Atlanta FaZe made a Sunday at a major LAN. The wording of that, I don't know if that extends to Chicago Huntsmen or OpTic Chicago.
That's what I was thinking too.
But regardless, that was pretty. That stood out to me, and I don't think it was Breaking Point. There was another tweet I saw about it, but if you just think about the teams that were involved in Championship Sunday today, it makes a lot of sense. there was the opportunity for several players to get their first championship this weekend. You look at LA Thieves, obviously Scrap, Hydra, and Envoy had all won previously. Nobody on Vancouver has ever won. Nobody on Miami has ever won. And then Kleenex and Insight have won championships. So only 5 of the 16 people competing today on Championship Sunday have a CDL championship under their belt. So there was an opportunity for several players to get their first title. It just turns out that it was Ghosty's turn, and yeah, I'm really happy for him. Like you said, we had a good time video breaking all that down and his role, and even in the grand finals, map 4, LA Thieves were up over 100 points. Hydra was like 21-7. Scrap was like 19-10, something like that, and Ghosty was 4-12, and he turned it around and ended up like almost neutral in that map 4, but they won by over 100 points. It didn't matter. Obviously he ended up frying after that point, but even I think it was Chance who threw a little dig in there saying like, Ghosty hasn't spawned in. Actually, Scump said that on the Scump watch party, so that's what I was thinking of. But yeah, that's a kind of the talking point around Ghosty that we said is like there are only X amount of kills on the map, and when you got like Hydra and Scrap just absolutely popping off, it might look like Ghosty is struggling when he's got a low KD there, like a 4-12 or 3-12, whatever it was at that time, but like he can't just create manifest kills out of thin air. Like if they're being taken and he's dying and then setting up a 2-piece for Hydra or Scrap, it is what it is. And at the end of the day, they were dominating that map, so it didn't really matter. But on a similar note with LA Thieves there, Scrap winning MVP for this the whole tournament, definitely well deserved. Even Methods was joking on the Scump watch party, like, God, this kid's ego was already through the roof, and now we're just inflating it even more. But he was absolutely frying all weekend, and even Hydra in the grand finals itself of Major 3 dropped a 1.49 KD, which according to Brian Stats on Twitter, shout out Brian Stats 1 at Brian Stats 1, 5th highest finals KD on LAN in the CDL era. Celium last major was 1.72. Kismet at Champs 2023 a 1.52. Skies Champs 2023 was a 1.51. Simp was a 1.5 at Atlanta 2020, and then Hydra today with a 1.49. So that's one thing we've talked about over the years. I know the one that sticks out is like Krim winning MVP for the Champs finals in the inaugural year and stuff. Like the MVP for the whole tournament versus the finals. Like if this is a finals MVP, Hydra probably gets it. But I think end of the day, this LA Thieves team was just happy to finally get a win, regardless of who actually got that MVP award for the tournament. And this is kind of like full circle in terms of what we were talking about a little while ago. Like this is the start of what they hope is a dominant end to the season.
Yeah, and if we're having these conversations about should Hydra have been the MVP of the tournament, look at how Ghosty's doing. I mean, that means that they dominated, that they did what they were supposed to be doing. They're, I think along with FaZe, these teams are unstoppable when their best players are clicking at the same time. And that's, that's obvious, just like in general, but when it happens, it's kind of magical. Like you're like, all right, this is ridiculous. And we, unfortunately, we've only seen it at the same time with both of these teams at Major 1. We really haven't gotten to see much of it since then. So I think that's going to be a pretty interesting storyline to watch is if LAT can keep these players kind of clicking at the same point, because I just looked up the KDs for this tournament. Hydra 1.27 for the entire tournament. Scrap was 1.22. Those are the top 2 players. So they both dropped 1.2s. And that kind of shows that it's, if those 2 players are doing that, and of course KD is not everything, but when they're just kind of deleting players off the map consistently, they're almost impossible to beat over a 5-game series, and especially over a 7-game series. But another team I did want to talk about is the Vancouver Surge. Obviously, another great tournament. I would say, I know they didn't win. I still think Neptune's MVP case is as strong or almost as strong as anyone. This was a team that had very little future or very little hope, it seemed like, after Major 1. And over the last 2 majors, they have reached the grand finals each of those majors. They're now up to 4th place in the CDL standings. They're only 10 points behind the Toronto Ultra for 3rd, so they very well may get into 3rd by the end of these qualifiers. And they performed really well this weekend. Of course, it did end on a bad note, and I think that's, if I have to analogize it to something, it would be like the Toronto Ultra a few years ago when they would consistently make it to, champs grand finals or just grand finals in general, and they would not end up winning. And, of course that sucks and everything, but it's really just that they're kind of learning. I don't think that Vancouver can't beat LAT. I don't think it's a Carolina situation where the gap is so large between these two teams, because Vancouver has beaten LAT before. They obviously went to Game 5 in this winter finals, and like you were saying over text messages, they're probably kicking themselves for how that series went, because, granted, they probably would have had to play them in the grand finals, and the grand finals didn't go their way, but I'm sure getting that win would have been a really big moment for them. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. They end up getting 2nd. They beat Atlanta FaZe, like I mentioned earlier, in the winners bracket round 1, which upset is kind of like a weird term for this, but I think it was surprising to me to see how it went down with, I believe FaZe won that opening hard point, and then they lost the three consecutive maps, if I'm not mistaken. And obviously we've been talking about how FaZe has kind of come out weak in a lot of these series. Like, they'll start slow and then they'll kind of ramp up and finish strong. Vancouver obviously wins this. They beat the Boston Breach in round 2. They get to the winners finals. They get reverse swept by LAT in those winter finals, and then they eliminate the Toronto Ultra to get to the grand finals, where they lose 4-0. I don't think we need to talk about like what they did wrong necessarily, but is there something that they can do, or what do you think is, like, I guess, missing from this team at this point in time that they haven't been able to reach the mountaintop just yet? I know that's kind of a tough question, just because it's like, I'm curious, just because they've competed so well against both FaZe and LAT in these best of 5s, but then they get to the best of 7, and now they're 0-8 in these major grand finals.
I just think it's not going to directly answer your question, but the way I view it is that if there was any doubt still, for whatever reason, that Vancouver is the real deal, I think this further proves that they are the real deal. When they first get Neptune into the roster for the Major 2 qualifiers, they beat FaZe there. People are kind of, like, oh, maybe it's a honeymoon phase, yada, yada. They make the grand finals of Minor 2, make the grand finals of Major 2 and lose there. And then again, they make the grand finals here. And in another case where, at Major 2, they didn't beat FaZe, but here at Major 3, they do in the first round, and they didn't beat LA Thieves. So in the past 2 events, they've made the grand finals, and they've only lost to one team, whether it was Atlanta in Major 2 and LA Thieves here at Major 3. The way I look at it right now is just Vancouver is definitively the 3rd best team in the game right now. And, I guess saying like right now has to factor in FaZe's performance, but you have to account for the fact they have 2 championships this year already. Mm-hmm. And it kind of just goes back to, like, it's a small sample size, kind of like you said, in terms of the other matchup in this triangle, but we had like the square of the top 4 last year where it was like, Thieves would beat Atlanta. Atlanta would beat OpTic. OpTic would beat Toronto. Toronto would be whatever that was last year. Right now, it's kind of like a triangle where it's Vancouver's beating FaZe, FaZe beating LA Thieves is beating Vancouver. And I know those other two, we've definitely seen Vancouver versus FaZe more than those other two recently. But for lack of a large sample size, that's kind of how I view it. And I think, as much as I was saying, like, Major Four, if LA Thieves win Major Four, then it's 2-2 in titles this year. If either of the three teams here or if two of the three teams in LA Thieves, Atlanta, or Vancouver make the finals of Major Four, they will be tied for 3 finals appearances this year, because FaZe have made 2 finals, Thieves have made 2 finals, being 1-1, and Vancouver have made 2 finals now, being 0-2. So although Vancouver doesn't have the championships, they do have the same number of finals appearances as those two other teams in Atlanta and LA Thieves. So I think it's obviously, having an 0-8 record in the grand finals is what most people are going to look at, but they realistically, in the winners bracket, they had a really good shot to take down LA Thieves and have, that we've talked about the lack of a winners bracket advantage in the CDL for years now, but they would have had momentum on their side if they were able to close out that series. It was 250 to 219 in the map 1 of the winners finals on Hacienda Hardpoint, and it was like Vancouver were looking pretty in control. LA Thieves made a strong comeback that it fell short in the end. And then that goes to a dealership search and destroy that Vancouver won 6-1. So they were looking pretty strong going into the control. But then again, like we said, the control, LA Thieves have just been so strong in that mode. It goes to a protocol hard point where, it was pretty close, 250 to 211. The highlight moment for me was an Envoy 10 streak that kind of, like, LA Thieves were fighting, and that kind of propelled them to pull away a little bit. And then that series ends with a 6-4 in a game 5 search. So it really was a very close showdown in the winners finals. And the last 2 maps of the grand finals didn't really do Vancouver justice, because it was another 3-0 in the control, 250 to 134 on that Skyline Hardpoint. But the 2 previous maps were ones I just mentioned before, Hacienda Hardpoint. This time it was 250 to 228 for LA Thieves. And the dealership search and destroy this time went all the way to around 11, a 1v1 between Scrap and Neptune, where they were both snaking behind cars on that one bomb site, and it went down to the wire. So really, like, outside of those last 2 maps in the grand finals and the control in the game 2 search, which that one wasn't close for Vancouver's sake because they dominated LA Thieves in the game 2 search, both controls and the game 4 and the finals were dominant for LA Thieves. Outside of those maps, these were pretty competitive showings, and they just didn't all go Vancouver's way this time around. And I again, like we were kind of just talking about, that it's a team that doesn't have that championship experience yet, but this is also a team that before Neptune joined this roster, they wouldn't have even been in these conversations that we're having about them being one of the top teams in the league, making 2 finals, having 2 second place finishes on the year. So I think that speaks volumes to the work the team's put in since adding him. Whether it's all those guys, 04, Booza, Nasty played really well this weekend in several occasions. Rainbow Ray, the mastermind behind the scenes for them. I think it obviously everybody wants to win. Only one team can win though, and it sucks for Vancouver now that they've had these 2 sweeps in the grand finals. But this is a team that is still a young squad, young core, and it's obviously working. They just have to, figure out what the key is going to be to push them to that next level of lifting a trophy. And it might, if LA Thieves keep playing well, it might unfortunately just not come right now, but they have the groundwork laid out there to to compete for these championships. And I think that's very important, especially looking all the way back at where Vancouver started this year.
I think that last point where the saying is like it's not about the results, it's about the process. Kind of that mentality, I think, is it could serve Vancouver very well toward the end of the season to not get bogged down in these major grand finals and how they turned out. Because, like you mentioned, the maps between in this particular case between Vancouver and LAT were for the most part pretty close. Those first two maps of the grand finals very well could have went to Vancouver, and then they would have had a 2-0 lead in a best of 7 against LAT. And who knows how that kind of turns out. Of course, we probably would favor LAT still to at least win, the two controls and, kind of fight back into that series. And it's probably not an easy series for the rest of the way for Vancouver. But at the same point, they're having these close maps. I believe it was Minor 2 that LAT won. They went to a Game 7 in that Minor 2 grand finals with LAT. They've been very competitive with them in a lot of these maps. So I would say, like, if I'm Rambo and these players are dejected, and rightfully so, that these are very competitive players. They want to win. It's not it's not going to be acceptable for them to get to grand finals and then just get swept and kind of go home and be like, all right, like at least we got second, guys. Like I understand that point of view, but if I'm Rambo, I'm saying we just have to keep going. Like, it's not about this series, it's about the end of the season. And if we can continue to compete, continue to improve, we might actually beat these guys when it matters most. When we get to champs, if we get to Major 4, that kind of stuff, I think it's important to kind of keep perspective about it's not just a sprint. Of course, the end of the season is coming, but if you're in the Major 3 grand finals and you win, that's great. But if you go and you kind of shit the bed at Major 4 or you shit the bed at champs, then what does it matter, right? We've seen that so much in the past. Like, okay, we won this tournament, and then what do we do the rest of the way? Nothing. Okay, nobody cares. Nobody kind of remembers those teams that win, like the midseason events. They remember the teams that perform, or I guess they best remember the teams that perform at the end of the season. So what? I don't know. I don't know what the solution is for Vancouver to kind of turn around some of these series, but they certainly have put themselves in a great position. And like you said, that this is not something that we would even have considered. We wouldn't even have talked about Vancouver, to be honest, kind of on this show. Like, if I don't even know if we talked about Vancouver at all at Major One's the recap show. I don't think it was even mentioned once about how the Surge did, because maybe you mentioned like they just need to make a roster change, and that was kind of it. But now we're dedicating 10-15 minutes to talking about a team that very well has an opportunity to have this incredible story and incredible turnaround this late in the season. One thing I will say, though, is the hard point in Search, like, they've been able to win some of those maps against LAT this season. I don't know, and of course we just talked about it with LAT. They're going to have to find a way to win one control against these guys. That's a lot easier said than done, but now they're 0-6 in control so far this season against LAT, which again is not surprising considering LAT is 185% of their control maps. But like you said, there are two controls in the grand finals, and losing both of them can be pretty detrimental to kind of that success when it gets down to the very end of the tournament. So I don't know what Vancouver can do technically, but just continue to improve and hopefully just get the better of LAT and or FaZe in the grand finals at some point in time.
I mean, hey, if we're talking hopefully for them, they gotta hope they get to another grand finals and just don't play one of those teams, right? That's more likely what they're hoping for at this point. But in all seriousness, first off, shout out the YouTube chat. YouTube chat popping off right now. Shout out Scotty Campson, Aubrey, Vivor, Kubel, and Ego Chall. Good name there. Showing love in the YouTube stream chat. But real quick to cap off Vancouver, unless you have something else, something you originally said at the start of this segment was the Neptune MVP candidacy. You kind of just brought it off brought it up like, offhanded, and we brushed over it to talk about their performance. But I just wanted to say, like, I think it would be tough for me personally to vote for him for MVP if he doesn't have a title this year.
Makes sense,
I think that's kind of been one of those metrics that
it's
I've
the
always looked at, whether
prerequisite
it's
to
rookie
be
of the year
considered, right? Yeah.
or MVP. Yeah. But obviously the if somebody told me they were voting for him for MVP, I wouldn't totally hate it just because of the drastic impact he had on Vancouver and completely turning around their season. But more realistically, obviously we won't know for sure how the CDL does it, but I know as somebody who's voted for the All-Stars and end of season awards the past couple of years, the way the league has done it is, in terms of All-Stars, is you just submit it's either, I think for MVP it's you submit 5 names in an order, but for All-Stars it's just 4 SNGs and 4 ARs, and then whoever gets the top 2 votes, they're the first team All-Stars. Whoever gets third and fourth most votes is second team All-Star, and they do 2 SMGs, 2 ARs on first team. Same for the second team. I think the most likely outcome at this point is going to be the 4 All-Star SMGs, in my eyes, are Simp, Hydra, Neptune, and Joe Deceives. And I think, right now, if I had to vote, I think that's probably how I vote. Obviously, Simp and Hydra, no particular order, they would probably be first team, and then Joe Deceives, Neptune would probably be second team for SMGs. But obviously, the way the votes shake out and everything like that, it could look a little different. But I think that's probably, I'm barring a catastrophic meltdown here for Vancouver at the end of the season, I think that's the most likely outcome for Neptune in terms of recognizing how big of an impact he's had on Vancouver this season.
Yeah, and I think that should be, we should talk about it just because we've talked about the rookie of the year, and we talked about it in that context of like, if a player comes in before, comes in after the beginning of the season, then that should essentially be held against them in a way, versus a player who has been through the entire season. So, like in Neptune's case, if he plays the rest of the season, obviously, just, assuming he does, that he would have played about 75% of the season. And, probably even less than that, considering there were 7 qualifying matches in Major 1 qualifier and a Minor 1, where there wasn't a minor in either of the Major 3 or Major 4 cycles, and those cycles also had 5 qualifying matches each. So he's played, let's just say, 2/3 of the season. He probably is not going to win MVP because of that. Like, I think, and like you said, he probably have to win a championship as well. But I think even if they got second at Major 4 and Vancouver is now in 3rd place in the CDL standings, and let's say Toronto wins Major 4, so there were 3 different teams that won it, I think you could make the case, if Neptune had played this whole season, okay, look at that body of work. Like, he was kind of able to take this team that we were solidly in the bottom 4, and he put them in the top 3 by the end of the season, and now has a chance to compete for a championship pretty much every time that there is a tournament. I think there could be a good argument made there. But, they haven't won a championship, assuming that they don't at Major 4. And even if they do in Major 4, I still think you have to look at someone like Scrap, is like, all right, he's probably the best player in the league, like he probably deserves it. Or if you want to say Simp or Celium or something like that, I think, especially because FaZe at the very least has 2 major championships, regardless of what happens at Major 4. So like, I think just from that standpoint, he's probably not going to win MVP, but I think he should be kind of like a notable, or like what do they call it, like honorable mention, where it's like, yeah, he deserves some recognition for being true to the wording of this award. He is probably the most valuable player in the league, because we saw exactly what Vancouver was before him, and we see what Vancouver is after him, where we don't have that kind of benefit, or we don't have that kind of I don't know what the word is, but we don't have that with Atlanta FaZe.
Luxury.
We don't have the luxury. Yeah, thank you. Like with LAT, those guys have been together the whole season. Atlanta has been together before even this season. So we don't know how they would have done if they had someone else in that spot. So I think that could be the case for him. But, All-Star makes perfect sense. Like, it would kind of be a travesty if they continue to do what they're doing and he doesn't make the All-Star team. I just think that would be pretty crappy, especially because we've given like kind of recognition, like on last season's All-Star, we were talking about it, how like Ghosty should have probably, like, he was at least in contention for an All-Star spot, even though his team wasn't nearly in contention with championships. At least to that point, they were very good afterward. But to that point, they were kind of a middling team, but he was just by far the best player on that team. And now, like, I think Vancouver's obviously way, way better than that. And Neptune should probably get some recognition for that at the end of the season. But yeah, probably not MVP. Let's talk about the Toronto Ultra. This is, no disrespect to LAT, no disrespect to Vancouver or any other team. This is the team of the tournament. This is the team that I think was most talked about, not coming into this event, but certainly throughout this weekend. And it's not because of, necessarily their performance, like in total, because they got, I believe, third at the major. So, that's a great performance. But it wasn't so much that, it was the fact that they got third with Mercules. Of course, I don't know if his name has ever been mentioned on this podcast before, and this is episode 171. But he came in as an emergency substitute right before the weekend. So as Bink said earlier in the show, we did the podcast, I believe that was Tuesday night, and Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, it is announced that Beans will not be able to compete at Major 3 because of visa issues. And in his place will be Mercules. Mercules is a really young, pretty unknown quantity. And then he comes in and they lose the first match to the Miami Heretics. Really, he looked pretty good in that match. It was not something like, oh, wow, he looked outclassed. It was kind of like the rest of the team was a little off when he was playing pretty well. And then they go on this incredible losers bracket run through the rest of the weekend. They beat LAG in losers round 1. They beat Minnesota in round 2, beat Boston in round 3, beat Miami, who had just eliminated Atlanta FaZe in the losers semis, and then they fall to the Vancouver Surge in the losers finals to get third place. I don't even know what the question is, because the question is like, how surprised are you? It's like, all right, like I'm very surprised, but where does Mercules go from here? I think the most obvious question that comes to mind for me is, does Toronto truly consider saying, hey, Beans, we love you, bud. We really respect you. You're a great player. You've done really well for us. We wouldn't be here without you. At the same point, though, we're going to go with this kid. We're going to go with Mercules. He's going to be in the starting spot. If you want to kind of explore some other options, try to get on another team, we completely understand, but we're going to rock with him. Is that the way, if you're the Toronto GM, are you considering that? And if not, where does Mercules go from there?
So this isn't how I wanted to start this section. I think this is like the end goal. No, but it's fine. I'll talk about it now and just go through what I was thinking earlier. But I think the again, me not having the outside information here and only going with what I know based on Toronto's dealings in the offseason over the past couple of years is their willingness to let players explore options, and even guys like Kleenex and Insight, who have been loyal to Toronto and been on that Toronto team for several years, several seasons now. They have been restricted free agents over the past few off seasons. They end up re-signing, but Toronto and the organization have given them the opportunity to go like seek out offers or get opportunities elsewhere. The caveat here with this Mercules situation is like legally and contractually, I don't even know if the kid signed a contract with Toronto, just with how fast all of this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very, like, I feel like legally he had to have signed something, but like, how long
Maybe a
would that have
10-day or
even
something?
been? Like, it's not like especially going into this event, Toronto had no idea what Mercules was realistically going to do. They definitely didn't expect him to play as well as he did. At least I would assume they weren't. So it's like, did they sign him to a contract for like the term of this weekend? Or did they sign him for the rest of the season? Did they sign him at all? Like, that is a big, like, from a legal and contract standpoint, that's going to be a big determining factor in the future of what happens for Mercules here. Because I think, now again, this is me, like, basing this off of what Toronto has done in the past. I think they would have no problem if they did sign him to some sort of contract that extended beyond just this weekend. If, let's just say, OpTic, because that's what everyone's talking about. They want the Green Wall wants OpTic Mercules replacing Skies. If OpTic approached Toronto and we're like, we'll pay a buyout to get this kid, I don't know what like, that's not, like, there's no way there was any like significant buyout on a contract that was signed very quickly before this tournament. So like, that's what I really can't like fathom how this would all go down from a legal and contract standpoint.
Real quick, I just wanted to say, like, what if they signed him to a 10-day? His 10-day would actually extend into the major 4 qualifiers technically, because he signed on Wednesday or something. So
I mean,
that would be crazy.
Probably makes the most sense.
Yeah, and I just don't know. Like, I just want to kind of just butt that in, because, like, I don't think Toronto would necessarily be like kind of dickheads about it and say like, hey kid, we're like kind of gonna screw you over. You're not gonna get on the team before the qualifiers. But I'm just kind of thinking like a team theoretically could hold that to the player if they wanted.
That's where I was going here.
Yeah.
And that, like, I don't want to, Paris Legion, RIP, they're done and dusted, but
thankfully
we don't really have a good understanding of how they really operated back then, outside of just not willing to spend money in the first place, or at least seemingly. But I agree, there are probably other organizations where I wouldn't be able to say the same thing. Like, where Toronto, I feel like if another team approached them, Mercules was under some sort of contract, I feel like Toronto would be willing to work something out with that other team to allow him to compete. At the same time that you mention it, I do think the performance this weekend has to, at least raise some questions about, like, I don't know excuse me?
Whether he stays with Toronto?
Yeah, I don't know, like, from everything we heard, like, from Insight Kleenex and Joe Deceives and like post-match interviews and stuff, they were joking around with Beans. I know Joe Deceives said like he felt like the way they were playing this weekend with Mercules, if Beans was there, he felt confident they were going to win the event. I think it was like an interview with the Flank. Kleenex said something along the same lines. Beans was being a good sport about this whole thing, like memeing on Twitter and stuff. So I feel like it feels like Beans is going to return to the lineup. But the other, X factor in this situation, we don't know the extent of Beans's visa issues, right? Like what if this is something that can't get resolved in the next 3 weeks before Major 4, and Beans isn't able to enter the US again for Major 4? Does that mean Toronto keeps Mercules on contract and they play these qualifiers with Beans, and then it's like, oh shit, he visa issue, Mercules, you got to step in again? That would kind of suck, and that would be the scenario where I lean towards they keep Mercules in the lineup, and that would suck for Beans. So it's there are multiple ways you can look at this, and it turns out to be a not ideal situation for several people involved. But I think, in my eyes, I really think some other team, and as much as I think, I would not be surprised if OpTic made the move to get Mercules in place of Skies. It would kind of be a bit of a shock, because we talked about it back when they got Ghosty. Like, that was the first time in a long time they really got like, a challengers player, like someone who wasn't a proven pro and added into the lineup. So this would be like that the follow up to that, the only 2 times really in OpTic history they do it, but I could see it happening. I think Cloud9, we talked about it a couple weeks ago. There was like that secret tryout of Capsule trying out for Attach, allegedly. The role fits a little bit better here for Mercules, so maybe Cloud9, tries to make a move and um gets Mercules. I guess Carolina, in theory, could
Probably, yeah.
try to get Mercules in place of Rex, but that would be kind of shitty for Rex just because he's had very limited reps with this team, and most of those reps have been against LA Thieves, who just won the event and have dominated that team with or without him. So it's really, yeah, it's just this is where all of my attention really is for the next couple of days in terms of this. We don't have a break before the major 4 qualifiers start. They start in 5 days on Friday. And we had I at least had said, like, I didn't think there would be a major roster mania or anything before the major 4 qualifiers because of the lack of the break, and because I felt like, whenever I said this a month or 2 ago, like I felt at this point we would kind of know the champs picture, and there would be, for the most part, teams would know whether they were in it or not and whether it was worth it for them to make a move or not. And I think that's kind of true to an extent. Like if we look at the champs race, it's really that 8th spot between like OpTic, Minnesota, and Cloud9. I don't think Minnesota makes a move because they just got Kenny. So maybe OpTic and C9 are the teams here looking at making a move for Mercules. But again, with the uncertainty surrounding the Beans' visa situation, what type of contract Mercules is signed to, and all that, I don't know what the outcome is here. But what I wanted to talk about in terms of all this is just how incredible of a story, for lack of a better word, this whole situation is really for Mercules. He, like you said, a kid we basically never talked about on the podcast because I certainly didn't know much about him. I think I was talking to Ego Chall correspondent Tremor in DMs during the tournament. He said something to me about like he was an S&D kid, and I'm scrolling now to find it. He said it was funny because Mercules was on the best challengers team at the time, just the first few weeks after launch of Black Ops 6, and got dropped after the first elite because he had just transitioned to variant and needed to adjust. Now look at him. So like this is just like this is a meteoric rise for a kid, and he played so well this weekend. I think it's really, this whole situation is a testament to not only his skill, but just the system that Toronto has in place, that they can just literally have a kid that they had no practice with slot in and get a top 3 placing with him. Like that's a testament to the Toronto coaching staff, as well as Insight and Kleenex and Joe Deceives. And really it was kind of, you could see it in their gameplay. I would have to look at Toronto's records on certain hardpoint maps before Major 3 and obviously with Beans, but I think it was either they were playing a lot of Skyline and Vault when it wasn't vetoed, and they were kind of saying on the Scump Watch Party, I think one of those maps Toronto had a good record on with Beans, so it might not be my point I'm about to say might not necessarily be the exact situation that it was, but in my eyes, those 2 maps are kind of like smaller maps, very hectic, and it felt like they kind of just said, okay, Mercules, you go out there, you just do your thing, get kills, and we'll play our game around that. And the way like Toronto's hardpoint this weekend was so incredible. You would have had no idea if you weren't like tuned in to the scene and everything going on. You would have no idea this kid Mercules didn't have any experience playing with these guys beforehand. When you watch the search, we've talked about Toronto being a pretty good search team this season. You could definitely, in my opinion, tell that they were a team that didn't have that practice. And that makes total sense given the circumstances and everything that were going on. I think they said like they didn't scrim at all before this, obviously just because of how how the situation unfolded and how quick everything had to come together to even get Mercules as a sub. But in a world where this visa stuff happened and they had like a couple days to scrim before the event, they wouldn't have even scrimmed S&D in that situation. They would have only scrimmed respawns and just winged the S&D. And that's kind of like, that's what it felt like to me watching Toronto. Is it felt like their S&D took a hit at this event just because Toronto was pretty good in search and destroy beforehand, and they were able to make it work in the hard points and even go beyond making it work. They played pretty damn well in the hard point this weekend, given the circumstances and having a young rookie last minute substitute coming in and filling the shoes of Beans here. So I just think this was an incredible situation all around. I don't know if you remember any other times, but the only other thing I was going to say on this, just in like a big picture thing, I know we've talked about the Pharaoh Priestess situation for subs beforehand, but the only times in my years of watching Call of Duty where I remember there being a substitute situation was, ironically, some of these involve 100 Thieves, like I was saying. The King Pappy CWL qualifier where King Pappy beat Team Caliber because Team Caliber had to field Embos as a last minute substitute for Goonjar, I believe. And then obviously King Pappy wins that event against or wins that relegation match, and King Pappy becomes that 100 Thieves, the inaugural 100 Thieves roster with the prisoner jerseys. There was that instance. There was the instance at CWL Fort Worth. Was that the one? Where's my tab? I already lost it. Yeah, CWL Fort Worth 2019 was the 100 Thieves team of Kenny, Octane, Slasher, Enable, and Priesta, where Priesta got sick and Pharaoh was previously on the team and he was just at that event, had to fill in on like the last day, and they got fourth at that event. And the only other one I could think of, and I'm having a hard time remembering this, how it exactly went down, but I remember with the historic Epsilon team, it wasn't the actual IW team that was really, really bad. It was some of the same people, but in 2018, they had the kid Nathan, who just like
Disappeared.
randomly decided not to show up to an event and disappeared. And according to the COD Gamepedia page, it says Nathan chose not to attend CWL Atlanta 2018 and Epsilon forfeited their pool play spot. But I'm looking at the page for that event and Epsilon isn't even listed. So I don't even know if Epsilon went to the event. It's got Reedy listed as a sub for CWL 2019 or 2018 stage 1. And Reedy played in Nathan's place after that. So I don't know exactly how that particular event went down with Nathan, but regardless, my point with this is those are the three instances that came to mind for me of a substitute coming into a team. And in those three instances there, the Embos lost with Team Caliber. Pharaoh comes in for Priesta. They get fourth place at that event. And whatever happens with Nathan and Epsilon, it doesn't look like they even played at the event. So this is, as far as I know, this is the best placing for like an emergency sub coming in third place, especially in the CDL era and potentially in COD esports history, as far as I know.
Yeah, I don't remember any other ones, other than the ones you listed of course. We've had some ones like, just they fill in for a match. Like even this season, we had Super come in for medals when he was sick. And of course, Super did eventually become a permanent member of the roster, and they've been very good since then. So I guess you could say maybe Toronto looks at Miami and is like, all right, like maybe that's kind of what we should do here. But yeah, it's a unique situation in the fact that they did so well at this event. I really, I think that's it's a great, like you said, it's a great story. Like it's just like you feel very good for this kid that he essentially changed his life in a weekend. The rest of his career, I would imagine, is completely different than had he not been able to compete at Major 3 with Toronto. So, I'm very happy for him. I think he should be on a CDL roster. I would be pretty shocked if he's not by the end of this week. I personally think it should be Toronto because, and I say that because, like you mentioned, we don't know the status of Beans' visa issue. Maybe it is like it just needs a few more days, like another week or so. Okay, maybe that's the extent of it. But we have Major 4 in less than a month. It's in like 3.5 weeks now. If he's not able to go in 3.5 weeks, he's gotta ride the bench, or there's no, like, if he has visa issues for Major 4, then you could say you're either on the bench or you can look elsewhere, because I just don't see how this team can really operate the rest of the season if he can't compete at Major 4 and then he can compete at champs. I know, like, some teams have done, the roster swap before champs. I just think that's a really weird situation to be put in. I think the Subliners had to do something like that one year where they had to play the Major 4 with, like, Decimate, I think it was.
It was when Clay took a break.
Yeah, and then he came back for champs, right?
Something like that, yeah. It was at the end of Cold War.
And I think we had that debate at that time of, like, what should happen here? Like, should he come back into the roster? Should New York just kind of keep moving forward and say, hey, like, we don't want to change the consistency of this team, kind of back and forth. And I think that's what Toronto really should be looking at here too. Of course, Major 3 is in Dallas, so it's in America. If you can't get into the country, then to me, that's the deal breaker. He can't come back. He can't be in this team. Simply because, and champs, we should mention, champs is in Toronto, or in Kitchener, which is near Toronto. So, like, champs is not the issue here for Beans. It's Major 4, and the kind of the break in action that can cause of not competing at Major 4 and then competing at champs. Granted, there is a month break between Major 4 and when champs begins. So we have about 2 months. I think it's 2 months from yesterday that champs will begin. I still think, like, that's a lot. That's to change and to give your last opportunity on land for that season before champs, to just kind of throw it away. I can't fathom a team deciding to do that, especially when you're in a position like Toronto where you realistically could win champs. It's not out of the realm of possibility that they would do that. And I was looking at some of the win-loss percentages. Obviously, the numbers are all thrown off, but before with Beans, so far this season, Toronto was winning 56% of their hard points. They won 73% of their hard points with Mercules this weekend. In S&D, like you mentioned, there was a drop in that game mode for Toronto. They were a 63% win percentage with Beans, and they won 29% of their S&Ds this weekend. I think they went 2-7 or something like that. And then Control, they were winning 55%. They went up to 67% this weekend. Of course, like I mentioned, it's kind of silly to compare the two because Toronto played 5 matches, I believe, this weekend, and they played 25, 30 matches before this weekend with Beans, online and offline. But I think if there's any doubt that Beans is not going to be ready for Major 4, then you probably do have to rock with Mercules. And maybe he's like, I don't want to be here, because if OpTic's calling, they're a very attractive option, especially, I'm sure, for a young kid. It's like, I can make probably quite a bit of money. I can become kind of a superstar, or at least a very popular player overnight by joining OpTic versus staying with Toronto. I think there's a lot to... I don't know if Mercules is Canadian or if he's American. I don't know what the deal is there.
I would assume he's American because he was an option for this event.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal is. But, like, obviously the Ultra play out of Toronto, and like maybe he doesn't want to move to Canada. So like that could be another thing as well. So there's a lot of factors. And like you said, I think we'll be watching this very closely over the next week or so just to see what happens, because this is unprecedented. Like we haven't seen this kind of thing happen where it's like, all right, this player that wasn't really seemingly on the radar for these teams, they're now competing for his services, and they're bidding for him, trying to get him on their team within 4 days. I think that's pretty crazy.
I do. I wasn't thinking about the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of, Mercules moving to Canada to play with the team if he sticks. I think the most likely scenario there would just be he competes from wherever he lives in the US, presumably, and the other guys are competing from Toronto. It would not make any sense to me how Toronto would be able to get a visa for Mercules to work in Canada if the opposite's happening with Beans, where he can't get the visa to enter the US for this tournament. But again, I'm no visa expert and all that stuff, so I don't know. End of the day, I do think the worst possible scenario for Toronto would be that they decide to go back to Beans. They play these qualifiers with Beans, and then Beans has visa issues again, and then they're in a situation with, if they kept Mercules, he's coming back in on, not having played the qualifiers with the team, or in a world where Mercules goes to another team, they have to try and strike gold with another emergency substitute. And I think they found the diamond in the rough this time, but I think if the same situation arose, there's no guarantee it works out as spectacularly as it did this time around with Mercules.
Yeah, one last thing I'll say about this is just with just this idea, like, can they get him a visa? I mean, technically, he could compete at champs in Canada without a visa by lying, right? Like, he could just say, I'm not going there to compete. I'm not going there to be like a professional athlete or whatever they consider it as. And like, I'm just saying, like, I don't know what his situation is, like if he would be able to get into Canada to get a visa, so on and so forth. I know there have been issues in the past, and I just think that should be, I don't know if they can get that cleared up in 2 months, regardless of what team it is or the circumstances around it. I want to talk about OpTic real quick because it is kind of related to this, because I saw a clip. This was the Flank podcast, obviously. They have, Parasite and Aches, Zuma, Ben, and Octane on the stream. And they were, this was after day 2, I believe. And Octane was saying how OpTic should be picking up Mercules the week. And I thought it was interesting, just his point of view or the way he phrased this. But he said, he's been a standout player at this event. The kid is auditioning for your team. They need to drop their ego about making this roster change. You have a serious roster issue. And what he was saying was like, kind of from his perspective, OpTic feels like above it all, like above making a roster change for like some unknown kid and like bringing in Mercules into a team. Like, and I think they all kind of criticized the fact that they even picked up Skies in the first place, which was not like an unpopular opinion. We talked about it at the time that it was like kind of a stopgap. It didn't really make a lot of sense just on the surface. But, I think that's just an interesting point of view, that OpTic might have an ego about whether to pick up someone who has just kind of come alive overnight. The opposite end, the argument against that is that they picked up Ghosty when he wasn't like the top, like he wasn't some kind of prodigy, like Simp or Celium or Hydra that was like, oh yeah, everybody is competing to try to get him. So that could be the argument against that, but he's pretty much the only one that I can really think of that they did that with. I don't remember a time where OpTic, like, they usually pick up known quantities. They know what the player is. They know he's talented, and that's who they're picking up. What do you think about that? And OpTic potentially making a roster change this late in the season, another roster change, and specifically trying to pick up Mercules.
I do think, the Mercules pickup, again, it's weird to say it because it's a very small sample size. You can say honeymoon phase or whatever you want, but they did play well this weekend. And again, I think it's a large testament to Toronto's system and the system they have in place. And he was able to just be plugged in there and instantly shine. I did like I said, I felt like for the hardpoint maps, I saw a lot of Vault and Skyline, and there were instances where he was using both an SMG and an AR. So that makes it feel like he could fit into a team like OpTic here, become that flex, let Dashy stick to the main AR, and then you got Shotzi and Hook on the subs. So on paper, that roster move makes sense to me. But again, like kind of like you said, I'm not sure how likely it is to happen, and I don't know how likely OpTic are to actually make a move. With that being said, though, I was pretty, gung ho the whole time with the champs winning roster of Pred and Kenny. That I felt like they were going to stick it out before all these other changes happen. But as it sits right now, OpTic are in 8th place in the CDL standings with 145 points. Minnesota is behind them at 115. So they have a 30-point buffer in terms of that last champ spot. But I think both Minnesota and OpTic got top 8 finishes at this event, but if I had to pick one team that has been looking better of late, I feel like it's Minnesota, and that might be a bit of a hot take, and I bet there are people who would disagree just because the records probably don't line up with that, because Minnesota has a lot of Game 5 losses, but they've played a lot of reps, and I think the Minnesota team has a lot of potential when those guys are clicking. And I think that's that was the story of Minnesota's tournament this weekend in my eyes, was their first series. They beat Carolina in winners or losers round 1. Nero was absolutely popping off. Losers round 2, Nero wasn't, absolutely popping off against Toronto, and Toronto won that series. So that's kind of been the consistency issues have kind of been the problem for Minnesota in either iteration so far this year. And that might be, OpTic might look at it as like, yeah, we got a 30-point buffer. So, Minnesota basically has to play really well in the qualifiers. We have to really stink, and then they have to outplace us at Major 4. So I don't know how OpTic's going to look at it. I could see them being willing to make a move. At the same time, I just don't know if they're actually going to do it. At the end of the day, though, like I said, they're 8th place in the standings, and they have 3 top 8 finishes this year at all 3 LAN events. And obviously that is with 3 different rosters, because the Major 1 roster would have been Kenny, Hook, Dashy, and Shotzi. Major 2 would have been Skies, Pred, Shotzi, Dashy, and then this last one is Hook, Skies, Shotzi, Dashy. So 3 different rosters, the same top 8 finish with 3 different rosters. And I guess you can look at that and say, like, if we make another change, is it just going to lead to another top 8 finish? Or you can say, if we make another change, it can't, realistically, we would hope it helps us get better, but I don't know. I just think that's a weird situation. I do think the lack of a break here, and the team literally plays their next match on Saturday, so in 6 days. So if they do make a change, they don't have a lot of time to practice with the new squad. Most likely, I'm pretty sure Karma made a comment at the end of the Scump watch party today, like, we get back to work on Tuesday or something like that. So like travel day tomorrow, they're scrimming on Tuesday. Like, that's most likely you have 3-4 days to scrim, whether it's with this current team or a new team, and then you're right in the thick of it with qualifiers again. So I think the lack of a break here before the qualifiers might be the wrench in this situation that causes OpTic and other teams to potentially forego making a change where they may have made a change if there was, a little bit more time to make something happen. But I do think realistically, like, if Mercules is an option, they have to at least consider it at this point.
Yeah. I think the best way to kind of frame it for OpTic is if they go 1-4 in the qualifiers and get top 12, like there's a pretty good chance that Minnesota could jump them. Like Minnesota would just would need to win 2 or 3 matches online, which I looked at their schedule. They're more likely to win 2 or 3 than OpTic is online in these qualifiers, and then they'd have to win a match on LAN. And granted, that's not a guarantee. Minnesota has been very disappointing on LAN, but I think that's just risking it a lot. Like there's only 30 points difference between them. Who knows what C9 does? I think they're kind of always destined or not destined. They very well could have that breakout performance at any point, and they're only 40 points behind, so they can make up a lot of ground if they string together some wins in qualifiers like they did in the Major 2 qualifiers, if they're able to break out on LAN. I mean, OpTic is just in a really bad spot right now. Of course, they're in a better spot than the bottom 4, but like that's really not saying a whole lot when you come into the season, you're expecting to compete for championships, and now you're competing just to even get to champs. I think that's just a really bad spot for them. And I think I just don't know, like, do you really think that you're going to, I can see the argument, right? Like you mentioned, like I could see saying we only have so much time before Major 4. Like we only have 3 or 4 weeks to get ready for the final event of the season. How much better can we get with this team versus changing the roster and then, taking these 3 or 4 weeks? At the same point though, like I think you have to take the swing. It's not like you're in a Carolina position where you can argue against the Royal Ravens even making that change and swapping out Vivid for Rex because they were so far up in the standings. Like you could talk yourself into like, all right, they just need to kind of figure it out with this roster versus making that late roster change and hoping that it works out. For OpTic, it's like you're just trying to get to champs. Like I don't think it really matters one way or the other if you get double first rounded at champs. I think you should just focus on trying to build as strong of a roster as you can. And I just think that there's a really low ceiling to this current team. And I think there is just a potentially higher ceiling and, potentially lower floor if you make that roster change. But like, it's about making the big swing, about trying to take a risk at times. And, it hasn't really worked out for them in the past, but I think they've just made wrong moves before. Like there's no way to put it other than that. Like I think them making the change and benching, or not even benching, releasing Hook for Pred, with hindsight, that was a bad idea, obviously, because of what happened afterwards. But even at the time, it felt like, why do this? Because you do so well in the qualifiers, then you have a down performance on LAN. Did you really not think that you were going to be able to kind of build on that performance at all? And then, we talked about it, how Karma said, like, they're pretty much starting over with Pred at that time. Like, yeah, I could see the argument now, but I just think they've made bad moves before. Take the risk, try to work it out. I'm very, not concerned is not the right word, but like, I would just be, if I'm the green wall, I am concerned. I'm very scared about what could happen over the next 4 weeks for OpTic.
Got to keep in mind too that there is EWC after champs, and there's a lot of money on the line there. So kind of like what I was saying with the Carolina and Rex move, I think OpTic just has to look at this situation and be like, obviously they want to be at champs, but like, does making a roster move put them in a better position to make champs and get a better placing at champs / EWC? Or do you stick with the squad and, does the sticking with the squad put you in a situation where, yes, you make champs and can have a good placing at EWC? I think that's the question that that camp has to be asking itself. And we they technically could make a mid qualifier roster change, but I don't think that makes a ton of sense. Like, if you're going to make a change, you want to do it to get as many reps with the new squad as possible. At least that's my philosophy and my view on it. So I guess we don't technically have to find out an answer within this week or the next 6 days, but in all likelihood, we should have a good idea of what OpTic's going to do before their first match on Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, don't make a mid qualifier change. Like, that just would seem very stupid. Like we criticized Carolina for doing the same thing. Like didn't make sense for them to even wait a week or two. Or I think we did that with LAG as well. Like just make the change. If you're wondering about it now, just go for it. We're about an hour and a half in. Do you want to talk about FaZe or do you want to hold it off till tomorrow? It's up to you.
We can hold it off till tomorrow if you want. That's fine.
All right. So obviously we don't usually do podcasts on Mondays, but with just the stuff that's going on with us, that's going to be the schedule for this week. Because Bink's going to be out of town, so we're not going to be able to do it on Wednesday or even Tuesday like we did last week. Instead, we're going to do back-to-back days of the Ego Chall Podcast. So if you want to watch the live stream of the podcast, you can do so tomorrow. That will be Monday, April 28th. Not sure on the exact time of that, so just kind of you really should just subscribe or follow the podcast feeds. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. And that's the best way to kind of keep up with the live streams. And if you're just like a listener or you watch the VOD on YouTube afterwards, obviously it'll be up on Tuesday morning instead of the typical Thursday morning uploads. So yeah, we're going to head out of here. This has obviously been a long podcast. We are going to try to do not as long tomorrow, but we won't have nearly as much to talk about. I think with each individual team, we might have like in totality, we might have another hour and a half podcast, but we will be talking about Atlanta FaZe, of course. It seems wrong to not discuss them on this pod, but I feel like we could go probably like a full half hour on FaZe just by themselves. Yeah. 2-hour podcast is probably not what you're necessarily expecting on your Monday morning commute. So we appreciate you guys and girls, I guess. Probably mostly guys, tuning into the podcast. We have always appreciated your support. And it's been nice to see some YouTube comments. I saw someone say that they really like the pod and like we have an unbiased view on things, which I think we both really appreciate that kind of praise. And we appreciate all of the support that we've seen over the past, what have we done? This is our third year, right? Third or fourth year, I think.
Scotty.
Yeah, because we didn't do anything the first year, but I think we've been doing it every season since then. It's been incredible to see. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Maybe leave a nice review as well. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter's at Ego Chall Podcast. And like I said just a few minutes ago, we will be doing the show on Monday, April 28th, and the podcast will go into your feeds on Tuesday, April 29th. And then we'll probably be gone for about a week because I'll be out of town over the weekend. So I'm not going to be able to do the podcast on the Sunday show that we usually do, but we'll figure it out. We'll obviously be around to talk about stuff. And tomorrow we will also be talking about the upcoming matches for the Major 4 Week 1 qualifiers. So we do have a lot to talk about, and we would appreciate you coming and joining us for that conversation. I am quite tired of talking at this point, so I'm going to turn it over to Bink.
Yep, we definitely did a good amount of yapping tonight. So thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Shout out some of you guys, but shout out Robert Roldan, Grady Hill, O Hayes, and all the other guys I mentioned during the show too for showing love in the YouTube stream tonight. Definitely means a lot. I love doing the post tournament Ego Challs. I love doing the preview shows, but the post tournament shows are just different. Like we have so much to talk about, and really, like like Preston said, you probably don't feel like listening to a whole hour and a half, but it's just it's what happens when stuff happens like this weekend where we have incredible story with Mercules, LA Thieves finally lifting the trophy, all that stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed the tournament. It was a great event, and we'll be back to talk more about it tomorrow and look ahead with our schedules at this point, like kind of teeing it up. But unfortunately, just due to no break before the Major 4 qualifiers start, and like the timing of everything going on right now, it might turn out that unless there are some very quick reports tomorrow about roster moves, we might not be here when something happens with Mercules or something doesn't happen with Mercules. But hopefully the Ego Chall curse doesn't strike us, and we get some reports tomorrow, and we'll have more to talk about on that front. But regardless, appreciate all the support. Thank you guys as always for showing love and whatnot. We'll be back here tomorrow to cover the rest of Major 3 and preview the Major 4 qualifiers as best as we can with the roster information we have at hand at that time. So see you guys then. Thank you again. And remember to send the chow.